I will either find a way or make one. Hannibal. Michelle Bond, that worked for Ripple and once worked for the SEC, is now head of Atom, and they're an SRO for digital assets. Now, Michelle Bond wrote this letter on April 18th, 2022 to Vanessa Countryman, which is the Secretary of the U.S. SEC. And in this letter, what I found pretty interesting is Michelle Bond calls out the SEC for the Hinman speech. So I'm going to read this to you. Just keep in mind that 19, 20, and 19 and 20 are citations for the Ripple case. Now, thus, the industry operated under the assumption that Bitcoin and Ethereum were not securities. However, as recently as in February 2022, staff from the SEC's Division of Enforcement have, according to reports, disavowed the Hinman speech as personal opinion, reportedly stating during oral arguments in the SEC versus Library Inc., the SEC has not asserted that Bitcoin and Ethereum are not securities, and the citation is to the Ripple Labs lawsuit. These reports, if accurate, further the main difference in another case the SEC is currently litigating, and that's the Ripple Labs lawsuit. In this case, the court denied the SEC's motion to strike defendants' affirmative defense that it violated the securities laws, which is the SEC had failed to provide fair notice that its conduct was in violation of law, and this in violation of due process. This case has potential to significantly curtail the SEC's enforcement approach to digital assets if the court agrees that the SEC did not provide market participants with fair notice regarding its views of digital assets. Given that the SEC staff now appears to be distancing the SEC from the Hinman speech, it is clear that the market participants are left further in the dark regarding the SEC's jurisdiction over digital assets. So I found this really interesting. It seems like Michelle Bond is calling out a contradiction from the SEC versus Library case to the SEC versus Ripple case. So let's see how this works. Remember, Michelle Bond is former SEC and former Ripple. And she has an ear to Congress. She's consistently at congressional hearings talking about digital assets and the evolution of this space. It would not surprise me to see this report on different senators and congressmen and women's desks.
Well, just as a final point, since we're talking about the People's Bank of China, their central bank, they seem very advanced on a digital currency, and maybe you could make a few final comments on digital currencies and how you see the work of the World Bank in the climate area before we open it up for questions.
Okay, so cyber and crypto and climate. So on what as you know better than me and any of us, the competitiveness of banks is in part based on the settlement, the time it takes to settle. And so as China puts in a digital currency, one thing they're trying to do is get ahead on the time of settlement and the cost actually of settling transactions and cross-border transactions. So I think one lesson to take away is the other central banks need to move very quickly to lower the cost of their cross-border settlements. So China's been, they shut down the Bitcoin kind of operation in China. I think that made sense because Bitcoin, it's hard to see that was in the interest of China to use all of this electricity that was coming out of coal-fired power plants in order to produce something that really doesn't have value within their productive economy. So they've been a little bit forward-looking on that. And these are topics that are discussed in the Financial Stability Board and in other international forums. So I think there are people a lot more engaged in this than I am. Let me turn to climate. The challenge.
David Malpass, the World Bank's managing director, is telling you that low settlement costs and fast settlement speeds are vital to the banking system, and in order for Western banks to stay competitive, settlement times need to be more efficient. The legacy system is slow and inefficient, and the use case for XRP and other digital assets is to increase settlement times. China is in the lead due to the digital yuan. The reason the U.S. has an advantage in economic strength is due to the globe's dependence on the legacy banking system. When a new system that has an efficient settlement speeds emerges, this is competition that takes away from the U.S. If you're able to send money fast and quickly with China's banks, why would you use banks that rely on legacy? Now, if the globe starts using a faster, cheaper methods that Chinese banks offer, that will cut into the dependence on Western banks as well as the dependence on the dollar. The U.S. has a very different government structure compared to China, and it's a lengthy process to roll out laws to accommodate a Fed coin. The U.S. partners with the private sector versus a top-down approach like China. Ripple is a U.S. tech company that can allow the banking system to stay competitive with the rest of the world. Also, for the U.S. to develop a Fed coin, that will take some time. Ripple has tech that's already available. Malpass also stated that China was very forward-leaning with the banning of Bitcoin mining. So if he views China as being forward-looking with Bitcoin banning, does he expect the proof-of-work ban to continue its trend?
What about the crypto pie? We have a new mayor, as you know, in New York City who really likes crypto a lot. Is there anything Bank of America can do or wants to do to compete with some of the other institutions that are participating in crypto these days?
Yeah, we have a very limited ability to do anything just because the regulatory structure around banks is just different. And so our research team writes on crypto and crypto-related companies, because they can do that because it's not. We do a very limited activity on futures and stuff, but there's really not a lot we can do in the way you're thinking about it. So our Merrill Edge is growing nicely every year. It has nothing to do with crypto, as other sort of online brokers or digital brokers may have, and it's just not allowed. We'll have to see how the regulatory process emerges.
Bank of America is one of the largest banks in America, and we know that they are a RippleNet partner as well as their head of the Global Steering Committee group. Now, the Bank of America CEO states that he is waiting for regulations to come forth. Banks are not in the technology business, they're in the banking business. So why would they create a technology from scratch when they can hire a third-party provider and just lease the software?
For us at the fund, we have presented to our board of directors our digital money strategy. And it was very interesting. The countries that were very enthusiastic about it and extremely supportive, emerging markets, developing economies, mostly because of the leapfrogging opportunity they see, the need to continue to expand financial inclusion and using CBDCs for that purpose. The advanced economies were supportive, but less so, obviously, well-advanced financial systems and use of fiat currencies. What we provide to our membership, three things. One, analysis, including comparative analysis. We wrote a very thoughtful, very thorough paper comparing 6 countries at different stages of CBDCs. We offer capacity development. If you are interested, these are the skills you need. And we offer countries a chance to think through, support to think through. Why do they want it? What is the purpose? Before they decide on technology. We are very engaged on the issue of interoperability for CBDCs and very engaged on the issue of regulation for stable coins and for crypto assets. Because we think if CBDCs do not have built-in interoperability, there would be fragmentation. And if there is no regulation, then the stable coins and crypto assets can have higher risks and be actually more of a problem than of a support. So moving fast.
Indeed. Well, the
IMF's role is to give guidance to developing countries on standards and tech, and to connect the developing nations to the global economy. This is why we've seen an alignment between Ripple and the IMF. They share a common goal. When Kristalina talks about interoperability between CBDCs, How are developing nations going to create state-of-the-art infrastructure from scratch? They're going to go to industry leaders and experts. It's much cheaper to lease software from a company that has already built it. We can tell from the subtle clues that the IMF has given Ripple-Tech their seal of approval. We know this because the IMF has spoken out against CBDC systems in the Marshall Islands, El Salvador, etc., but they have not said one negative word about Palau or Bhutan.
To ensure that people are safeguarded, right? The other element as well that we focused on is talking about progressive regulation on crypto, on the metaverse, on fields that people typically try to push to the future and say, we will not address it today, we will address it in 2, 3, 4 years down the line. And then every year we do that, we realize as well that we as a government benefit. So in 2018, the Director General of the World Health Organization talked to us about the coming pandemic. And some people just looked at him as if he was talking about something that's hypothetical and never will happen. We took it seriously. We did a forum in 2019 called the ZX Forum to focus on how do you combat the next pandemic. Today the UAE ranks amongst the best, maybe number 1 or 2.
The FSB, the OECD, the G20 have been preparing with regulations for a long time. They prepare in advance and have frameworks in the event of. This is contingency planning. So what is the emergency that ushers in these regulations? It slows settlement times like what Malpass was talking about. If it takes 5 to 10 days to send money and the money is for food imports, it is vital for these economies to work as a well-oiled machine. And these slow settlement times are interfering. Countries, specifically developing countries, are more prone to supply shocks, and the goods need to be paid for. Another emergency that could happen is currencies depreciating rapidly, and cryptoization happens where people are fleeing fiat for crypto, and of course, a cyber emergency. We have seen the writing on the wall for all these scenarios.
And by the way, there would be a meeting in Ukraine that the World Bank is hosting, and of course we will participate this week. On the question of decoupling and the risk of it, I mean, exactly because I lived on the other side of the Iron Curtain, I also know that we didn't share the same values and the same economic system. So how do you connect if that is absent? And therefore, the risk of decoupling, the risk of fragmentation comes if we are not able to build something that we all share. And what is it, the thing we need to build? Obviously, rule of law. So can we do it despite of some differences? Is that possible? I think risks are there, that it may be very, very difficult. But we should not give up on trying to find that anchor. What is best for people everywhere? And on a very a personal note, I'm a big believer that when there is a will, there is a way. And that if we only have more women heads of states and prime ministers and presidents.
The IMF and the World Bank are technically independent of the U.S., but in reality, the U.S. has a tremendous amount of influence over these institutions with veto power. When the IMF wants to issue an SDR, they need approval from the United States government. And recently, Janet Yellen gave approval for $500 billion worth of SDRs. Any country that does not trust the United States cannot trust the IMF or the World Bank. So this rule of law that Kristalina is talking about in the center cannot be the IMF or World Bank. So what do they have planned? A public chain. A distributed ledger is a ledger that is trustless. One party cannot rule the network. The trust is distributed. The ledger needs to be green, and if it's incentivized like proof of work or proof of stake, the wealthiest participants have network dominance.
So I could sort of dismiss quite a few things. I don't think it's particularly about the efficiency of the domestic payment system. I think we've all seen a lot of innovation in that area. There is there's a big issue about cross-border payments. Right. But if that was the only issue, we would, I think, design something very different.
There's a big issue with cross-border payments, and if that was the only issue, they would go for a centralized system that the BIS designed. Tokenized systems allow innovations to be built on top of and in the gaps of, expanding the networks to new use cases and converging with other technologies like the Internet of Things and smart automation.
have a payment system that doesn't run through SWIFT or something like that. How much is that, do you think, a real concern? And is that showing up at all in discussions of international financial architecture or G20, these issues of wanting an alternative to the US dollar under sanctions?
I think let me sort of split it into two parts, because I just wanted to say at the beginning, because I think it's important to, in a sense, preface any remark with this. What Russia is doing in Ukraine is appalling, which is why I and others, walked out on the Russian part. I'm afraid it's appalling, and I think it's important that they understand that, and I'll use this, an emotional word, I know to use this word, and particularly in history, we are not, in my view, and I'm central bankers, I'm not a politician, there should be no appeasement of Russia because we have to deal with economic problems as a consequence of what's going on. We just roll our sleeves up and deal with those. Right. That's the right thing to do. Hard though it can be at times, that's what we're here for as public officials, and we just get on with it, frankly. There can be no appeasement in that sense. And I think the reason I say at the beginning is because, yes, I think we do have to reinforce the message, and it has been said, many times in the meetings this week, that, of course, it will be damaging if there is fragmentation. It will be damaging if there is a setback to free trade, and we have to make the case more strongly for why that is not the right answer. It's the wrong answer, and we'll do that, I'm sure. I mean, I was very interested, in some of the meetings where I think trade has become, if I'm going to be positive about it, is put trade more onto the agenda than it was. It has sunk too far off the agenda, and it's coming more up the agenda. So fragmentation is the wrong answer. I think those who think they will do it, I think are going down the wrong road. But we have to, we're going to have to make the case once again. I mean, these issues keep coming around, sadly.
Well,
a friend on Twitter sent me this. He's German and he's concerned about the West sanctioning Germany. Germany depends on Russia for natural gas and oil. What happens if the West actually sanctions Germany and sanctions every country that's doing business with Russia? Think about the consequences of that. The system works today because the assets that are held are in the dollar-euro system. What happens if every country becomes fearful and pulls their assets from the dollar-euro system? The system collapses. Perception is a tool that's pointed on both sides. Hannibal. Thanks everyone, I hope you enjoyed the show. If you enjoy content like this, please consider joining my Patreon. Remember to hit the bell.